There was a man I heard of once, a merchant in a coastal town, who spent 30 years trying to stop the tide. Not literally, of course. But every morning he would walk down to the shore and feel a kind of rage at the water. The way it came in without asking, the way it pulled back without explanation. He had a warehouse near the edge of the beach, and the damp got into everything, the wood, the salt, the air itself. So he fought it. He built walls. He rerouted drainage. He spent small fortunes on materials that the sea simply ignored. And every night he went to bed exhausted, not from the work of his trade, but from the war he had declared on something that didn't know it was in a war. His son, who was maybe 19 or 20, watched all of this. And one afternoon, the son said something simple. He said, "Father, what if we just built the warehouse further up the hill?" The old man didn't speak for a long time. Not because the idea was complicated, because it was so obvious that it made his whole life feel like a question he'd forgotten to ask. That story lives in me. Because most of us are that merchant. We are not fighting the sea. We are fighting life itself. We are fighting the fact that things change. We are fighting the fact that we are not always in control. We are fighting our own breath, in a way, trying to inhale and never exhale, trying to hold the moment so tightly that we crush it before we can feel it. And I want to talk to you about this, not to give you a technique, not to hand you a method for better struggling, but to point at something you may have already sensed in a quiet moment, that life was never asking you to win. It was asking you to move with it. We have been taught, and I mean deeply, culturally, almost genetically taught, that existence is a problem requiring a solution. That you arrive in this world with a task: survive, succeed, accumulate, secure. And if you feel the weight of that, if some part of you feels perpetually behind, perpetually insufficient, well, that's not weakness. That is what happens when you take a living thing and hand it a war it never agreed to fight. Watch what happens when you tell a person to relax. Really watch it. They tighten. They try to relax, which is precisely the thing that makes relaxation impossible. Because the moment you turn rest into an objective, you've already lost the thread. Rest doesn't come from effort. It arrives when effort stops pretending it's necessary. This is the thing about struggle. It is deeply convincing. It feels productive. It feels moral, even as though the person who suffers most for their goals is somehow more deserving of the outcome. We have entire philosophies built around this idea that hardship is virtue, that if something costs you nothing, it probably isn't worth having. And I'm not saying life is without difficulty. I'm not standing here telling you the world is soft and accommodating. Clearly it isn't. There is grief, there is loss, there is the particular agony of watching something you love come apart and being utterly unable to stop it. But there is a difference, a profound one, between the difficulty that life gives you and the war you declare on top of it. Think of water for a moment, not as a symbol, just as a thing. Water, when it meets a rock, does not stop. It does not strategize. It doesn't spend 3 years in therapy processing its relationship with obstacles. It simply finds the way around, or through if time allows. And it arrives eventually where it was always going, not because it forced the journey, but because it was the journey. There's something worth sitting with there. The water is not passive. It moves, it has direction. It carries tremendous force. It carved the Grand Canyon, after all, which is not a small achievement. But its power comes precisely from the fact that it does not resist its own nature. It doesn't try to be something other than water. You, on the other hand, and I say this with genuine tenderness, you have spent considerable energy trying to be something other than what you are. Trying to be more certain, more composed, more linear, more like the person you imagined you'd be by now. And that gap between who you are and who you think you should be is where most of the struggle lives. It is not really about your circumstances. It is about that distance, that constant internal negotiation, where you stand in your own life like an uninvited guest, slightly apologetic about taking up space. I want you to imagine music for a moment. Not recorded music, live music being played right now, by someone who knows the instrument so well that they've stopped thinking about their fingers? What makes that music feel like something? What is it that moves through the chest when a phrase lands just right? It isn't accuracy. A metronome is accurate. Nobody weeps at a metronome. What moves you is the aliveness of it, the sense that the musician is not executing a plan, but genuinely inhabiting the moment. There are mistakes in live music if you listen carefully. Small ones, notes that bent slightly wrong, a beat that dragged. But these don't diminish the music. Often they are exactly what make it feel real rather than manufactured. Life, I want to suggest, is much more like that music than like a project with deliverables. It is not a performance you can rehearse until it's perfect. It is happening right now, and the only question worth asking is whether you are present enough to actually play it, or whether you are still standing off stage, memorizing notes for a concert that already began without you. The struggle, you see, is the off-stage anxiety. It's the rehearsal that never ends, because you never quite feel ready. And readiness, as it turns out, is not a feeling that precedes the moment. It is something that only appears inside the moment, once you've stopped waiting for it. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you've done. You know it, I think. The exhaustion that arrives on a Sunday evening when you haven't moved from the house, haven't exerted yourself physically, haven't done anything that would justify the weight you feel. It settles somewhere behind the eyes. It's the tiredness of someone who has been bracing all day against what might happen, against what didn't happen, against the low hum of feeling that things are not quite as they should be. That is the exhaustion of resistance, and it is, in my observation, far more draining than any physical labor, because the body knows how to recover from work. It was built for that. But the mind that is perpetually at war with its own experience, that mind does not rest even in sleep. It keeps the argument going. It rehearses old grievances and anticipates new ones. It is, in the most literal sense, working against itself. And here is what I find almost darkly comic about this. The thing you are resisting is usually not even present. It's a memory or a projection. The thing that exhausted you today was not today. It was your version of yesterday overlaid onto today, and your anxiety about tomorrow bleeding into the edges, the actual present moment. This breath, this light, this particular temperature of the air, that is almost never the problem. The problem is the story running just underneath it. The narration that never stops. The voice that says, this isn't enough. You aren't enough. Something needs to be fixed. Something needs to be different. And if you've heard that voice long enough, you stop noticing it as a voice at all. It just becomes the texture of consciousness, the background static of being alive. But what would it mean to let that static quiet? Not to silence it through force. We've established that forcing things tends to tighten them. But what if you simply stopped feeding it? Stopped treating every anxious thought as a memo requiring your immediate response? I once spent time near a river in the countryside. I won't say where, because the place matters less than what I noticed. And I sat for a long while, just watching the surface of the water. There was debris moving through it. Leaves mostly, a small branch, some kind of seed casing spinning slowly as it drifted. And I noticed that the river was not concerned with any of it. The debris was there, and then it wasn't. The water didn't alter its character based on what was passing through it. The mind at its most natural, and I mean before all the training, before the school years and the evaluation and the performance of selfhood. The mind may be something like that river. Thoughts arise. They rise, feelings move through, and none of them are the river itself. They are just what's passing. The struggle begins when you mistake the debris for the water, when you grab onto a leaf and say, this is me, this is who I am. I must carry this, I must resolve this. I cannot put this down until I understand it completely. And then another leaf arrives, and another, and soon you are so loaded with leaves that you've forgotten entirely what it felt like to simply flow. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is the point where someone usually says, yes, but what about responsibility? What about the things that genuinely need my attention? What about the relationships, the work, the practical architecture of a life? And it's a fair question. I'm not suggesting you become indifferent to your life. Indifference is not the same as ease. A person who doesn't care is not a person who has found peace. They've simply found a different kind of armor. What I'm pointing at is something more subtle. It's the difference between engaging with life and warring with it. You can work hard without making hardship your identity. You can care deeply without turning caring into a form of control. You can show up fully to the difficult moments without deciding that difficulty is the fundamental nature of things. Consider how you move through a day when something is genuinely going well. Not perfectly, just well. There's a quality to that movement, isn't there? A kind of easy attention. You're not gripping the hours. You're not checking over your shoulder. Things arise and you meet them, and then they pass and something else arrives. And the whole day has a kind of rhythm that you didn't manufacture, but that you somehow participated in. That is not luck. That is what happens when the resistance drops, even briefly. That is what life feels like when you stop treating it as an opponent. The dance metaphor, and I use it deliberately, not casually, is worth examining for a moment. When you dance, and I mean really dance, not perform dancing, but actually move because the music has gotten into your body somehow, there is no gap between intention and action. You are not planning the next step while executing the current one. You are simply in it. And the remarkable thing is that this state, which feels so free, so unstructured, is actually full of responsiveness. You are responding to the rhythm, to the space around you, to your own body's momentum. You are in fact doing something quite complex. But it doesn't feel like complexity. It feels like simplicity, because nothing is being fought. That is the quality I'm trying to point at when I say life is a dance. Not that life is light or trivial or without weight. A tango is not light. Flamenco is not trivial. There are forms of dance that carry tremendous grief in them, tremendous longing. But even in those forms, the dancer is not against the music. The dancer is in conversation with it. And that conversation, that responsiveness, is available to you in every moment of your life. Not as a technique, not as something you achieve after sufficient meditation or the right sequence of realizations. It is available right now, in the way you are holding your body as you listen to this, in the quality of attention you bring to the next ordinary thing you do. The man who stopped struggling, and I want to come back to him because his story isn't quite finished, didn't stop struggling because he found a philosophy. He stopped because one morning he woke up and the war simply felt too old, too familiar, like an argument you've been having for so long that you can't remember what started it, can't remember what winning would even look like. And in that tiredness, something opened. Not dramatically. There was no light, no sudden revelation. He just made his coffee and stood at the window and noticed the particular way the early light was falling across the floor. A long, pale rectangle reaching toward the table. And for a moment he was entirely there, not planning, not reviewing, just there, with the light and the coffee and the quiet. And it lasted maybe 40 seconds. But in those 40 seconds, he understood something he couldn't have been told, that life had been doing this the entire time, offering these moments continuously like a hand extended, and he had been too busy fighting to take it. The hand is still extended. That's what I want you to hear. Whatever age you are, whatever accumulation of regrets and half-finished stories you are carrying, the hand is still extended. Life has not grown impatient with you. It does not keep a record of how many times you refused it. It simply keeps offering, the way the morning keeps arriving, regardless of how you spent the night. And I think somewhere beneath all the noise, you already know this, there are moments, small ones, easily dismissed, where you feel it. Maybe it arrives when you are doing something utterly ordinary. Washing dishes, walking to the car, waiting for water to boil. And for just a moment the commentary stops, and you are simply there, and the there-ness of it has a quality that is almost shocking in its sufficiency. You don't need to add anything to that moment. It is already complete. And the fact that it passes doesn't diminish it, any more than a note is diminished by ending. The note ends so that the next note can exist. That is not loss. That is music. We have a very peculiar relationship with endings in this culture. We treat them as failures. The relationship that concluded was a failed relationship. The career that changed direction was a failed career. The version of yourself you outgrew was apparently a failed self. But what if ending is simply part of the structure of things? What if the tide going out is not the ocean failing at staying? What if the leaf releasing from the branch in autumn is not the tree giving up, but the tree doing precisely what trees do? Cycling, breathing, preparing for something that hasn't arrived yet. I am not asking you to be cheerful about loss. Loss is real. Grief is real, and it deserves to be felt fully, not spiritually bypassed with some neat reframe about cycles and seasons. When something ends that mattered, a person, a time of life, a version of yourself you loved, that deserves your full presence, your actual tears, not your philosophical composure. But there is a difference between grieving and resisting the nature of things. You can mourn deeply and still, in some quieter layer of yourself, understand that impermanence is not the enemy. It is the condition that makes anything matter at all. If the music never ended, it wouldn't be music. It would be noise. Permanent, undifferentiated noise. What would your life look like? And I ask this as a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. If you stopped treating it as something to be solved, not managed better, not optimized, not finally, eventually gotten under control, but simply lived, moved through, participated in, the way you participate in a conversation with someone you genuinely like. Not performing, not strategizing, just present and responsive and willing to be surprised. Because here is what I have noticed over years of watching the way humans relate to their own existence. The people who seem most alive are rarely the ones who have things most figured out. They are more often the ones who have made a kind of peace with not having it figured out, who have discovered that uncertainty, which everyone else is frantically trying to eliminate, is actually the medium through which genuine experience moves. Certainty is a closed room. You know exactly where the walls are, exactly what the light will do, exactly how long it takes to cross from one side to the other. Safe, yes, but nothing unexpected can enter. And nothing unexpected means nothing that could genuinely move you, nothing that could reach past the defended surface of yourself and touch something real. Uncertainty, by contrast, is open air. Uncomfortable, yes, occasionally frightening, but alive in the way that only open things can be. There is a particular quality to the person who has stopped struggling that I want to try to describe, because it is easy to misread. They do not seem detached. That's the first thing. Detachment is a kind of performance, a studied coolness that keeps life at arm's length while pretending to be wisdom. The person who has genuinely stopped struggling is not cool. They are often surprisingly warm, surprisingly present. They look at you when you speak. They laugh at things that aren't particularly clever because they aren't filtering for cleverness. They are just there, receiving what arrives. They also still have preferences. They still pursue things. They still feel disappointment when something doesn't come together the way they hoped. But the disappointment doesn't metastasize into a verdict on reality. It is just disappointment, a feeling moving through like weather. And then it passes, and they are curious about what comes next rather than bitter about what just left. That is not spiritual achievement. That is not the result of years on a cushion or the correct sequence of insights. It is, I think, something simpler and stranger than that. Or it is what happens when a person finally gets tired of the war and sets down the weapons and just looks around at where they actually are and finds, to their considerable surprise, that where they actually are is not so bad, is in fact rather extraordinary, is full of things they were too busy fighting to notice. The light through a window in the late afternoon, the particular sound a city makes just before it wakes up, the weight of someone you love sitting next to you on a couch, not saying anything, not needing to say anything, the way a piece of music can locate something inside you that you didn't know needed locating. These are not consolation prizes. These are not the small things you settle for when the big things don't arrive. These are the big things. This is what life actually consists of. When you strip away the story about what life should consist of, the dance is made of these moments, step after step, none of them permanent, none of them guaranteed, all of them available if you are actually here to receive them. And so I want to leave you, not with a conclusion, because this doesn't conclude, it continues, but with a question to carry. Not to answer, just to carry. The question is this: what would you do differently, right now, today, if you knew that life was not a problem requiring your solution, but an invitation requiring only your presence? Not tomorrow, not once you've sorted the outstanding difficulties, not when the situation finally stabilizes into something more manageable. Now, because the tide doesn't wait for you to finish your argument with it. The music doesn't pause while you decide whether you're ready to dance. The light that is falling across the floor at this particular angle, in this particular moment, will not fall this way again. You don't need to struggle your way into your own life. You are already in it. The only question is whether you are willing to stop fighting long enough to feel that.
Have you ever sat down, truly quiet, and let your mind drift back to old moments' words blurted out in anger, hasty actions you later wished you could pull back like a thread from a tapestry? We all have such scars, jagged fragments of memory lying dormant in the dark corners of the soul. And then, from the vantage point of today, with all its new light, with a wisdom more seasoned, you look back at your former self, as if that person should have known everything you know now. But please, pause for a moment. Imagine scolding a 3-year-old for not solving a quadratic equation. Strangely, we often do the same to ourselves. That person from the past, with eyes still foggy, a heart still tender, with knowledge just enough to take the next step, tried their best within their limits. Not by your standards now, but by their own at the time. Life, you see, is not a test graded from on high. It's more like a dance rehearsal in the dark, where every misstep is part of learning balance. Mistakes are not sins. They are off-key notes in the symphony taking shape. If you deny them, you deny the very path that brought you here. Forgiving yourself, therefore, is not a solemn ritual, not a resounding declaration in a church. It's just a gentler gaze into the past. Instead of whipping the horse that ran its hardest, you stroke it and whisper. You did it with what you had. Imagine carrying a backpack full of stones. Each stone is a painful memory, a word you wish you'd never said, an action you want to erase. You trudge through the years, the pack growing heavier, your back more bent. But one day, you realize those stones are no longer on the road ahead. They're just images in your mind, ones you voluntarily clung to. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. Letting go is stopping the self-torment for a version that's dead. The person who said those hurtful words no longer lives. The only one still imprisoned in the jail of memory is you, the current version, still locking the door yourself. Forgiveness is unlocking. Not to flee the past, but to step through it without stumbling. You don't have to love everything that happened. You just need to stop warring with it. Warring with the past is like fighting your shadow on the wall. The more you strike, the larger and more terrifying it grows. And the miracle is, when you stop condemning yourself, you start hearing your own laughter from the very beginning. The laughter of a child learning to ride a bike, falling flat, then getting up, with no grudge against the ground. That child is still inside you. Forgiveness is giving it room to breathe. But forgiveness doesn't stop at your own doorstep. It opens a larger door to the world outside. Because if you can look at yourself with eyes of compassion, you'll begin to look at others with the same eyes. When someone hurts you with sharp words, careless actions, you often react instantly. Why did they do this to me? The question is valid, but not deep enough. Go one step further. Where did they learn to hurt? Every behavior has roots. No one is born knowing how to cause pain. They learn it from old wounds, from words hurled at them when they were small, from unnamed fears. The man roaring in anger might be the boy who once cowered in a corner while parents fought. The cold woman might be the girl abandoned without explanation. Understanding this doesn't mean you must embrace every toxic behavior. Understanding is so you don't carry the flame of anger in your heart. You can walk away, set boundaries, but you don't need to plant more seeds of resentment in already barren soil. Forgiving the world, therefore, is not accepting every injustice. It's refusing to join the spiral of retaliation. It's saying, enough. The chain of pain stops with me. And when you do that, you'll realize a simple yet profound truth. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to others. It's a gift you give yourself. It's how you reclaim space for your heart to beat for joy instead of burden. Most of us are taught that intelligence is knowing a lot, calculating quickly, winning arguments, or remembering the exact date of a battle 300 years ago. That's the intelligence of books, report cards, shiny trophies on a shelf. But there's another kind of intelligence, quieter, deeper, far rarer. It's not measured by scores or shown in sharp words. It's the ability to step into another's inner world as if it were your own home, sit by their fireplace, and feel the warmth or cold they're living in. This wisdom needs no degree. It just requires setting aside the ego, screaming, "I'm right," to listen to another story. When someone insults you, the first reaction is often to build a towering defensive wall. They're wrong. I'm right. They deserve punishment. That wall feels safe for a moment, but it also makes you a prisoner of your own anger. Now try another way. Imagine watching a play. The villain struts out, growling, flailing arms. The audience might boo, throw tomatoes. But you, if you're the director, you know that actor has rehearsed this role since childhood. He learned to growl from a father who growled at him. He learned to flail from punches that landed in his youth. The role isn't his essence. It's the costume he wears because he was never taught to remove it. Forgiveness begins when you stop throwing tomatoes and quietly step onto the stage, looking into the trembling eyes behind the fierce mask. You don't have to agree with the role. You just need to see that the actor is human, once a child who cried. This sounds hard because we're used to snap judgments. Judgment is like fast food, cheap, convenient, instantly filling. Understanding a person is like cooking from scratch, selecting ingredients, washing, slow simmering, waiting. It takes time, effort, and sometimes you taste bitterness before the dish is done. But in that process, you nurture something fast food can never give, the survival of your own heart. Try a small exercise. Next time someone hurts you, instead of retaliating, take 3 minutes, just 3, to imagine their life. Picture them at 5, 10, 20. What words did they hear? Who did they lose? How did they learn to protect themselves? You don't need to be perfectly accurate. You just need to crack open a small gap in your defensive wall for light to slip through. Those 3 minutes won't change the other person, but they'll change you. They turn you from a judge on a high seat into a quiet companion on a dusty road. And strangely, when you stop judging, you find yourself forgiven by yourself. Now go further. Look at larger conflicts between nations, groups, opposing ideologies. We call each other enemies, demons, threats. But if you zoom out really far, what do you see? A tiny planet hanging in space, with 7 billion people crammed onto it, each carrying their own story, each believing their story is the only truth. From that height, borders vanish, ethnicities vanish. All that remains are children raised in different homes, learning different lessons, now shouting in each other's faces because no one will listen. Forgiving the world isn't a fantasy of overnight peace. It's refusing to keep throwing stones into the vortex of violence. Every time you choose understanding over condemnation, you pull one brick from the wall of hatred humanity has built for thousands of years. The wall may not collapse immediately, but it weakens a little. And that's a start. Some will say, but if I forgive, won't they take advantage? A fair question. Forgiveness isn't foolishness. You can forgive a wild beast, but don't need to open its cage to be torn apart. Forgiveness is the heart's work. Boundaries are the mind's. They don't contradict. They complement. Think of the ocean. Waves may rage, crash against rocks, shatter, but deep below, the ocean remains calm. Forgiveness is that depth. It doesn't stop waves from rising. Life will still have conflict, pain, but it keeps you from being swept away. And when you live from that depth, you'll notice something strange. Others start to change when they no longer have to defend against you. Not always, but sometimes A single non-judgmental glance is enough to melt years of ice. Pain has a strange quality. It never fully dies, it just reincarnates. A child harshly scolded in a dark kitchen may grow up and repeat those exact words to their own child on a sunny afternoon. A boy abandoned on a street corner may become a man who coldly pushes his wife away when she needs an embrace most. Pain doesn't vanish. It dons new clothes, changes its voice, and continues its journey across generations. You can call it karma, the cycle of hurt, or simply life. The name doesn't matter. What matters is recognizing. If no one stops, the chain drags on forever. A toxic word from 1950 may still echo in a child's trembling voice in 2025. Imagine holding a red-hot rope at one end. The other, the one who hurt you, grips the far end. You think you're holding tight to punish them, but your hand is the one burning. Forgiveness is letting go. Not to drop the rope and let it keep burning, but to extinguish the flame before it reaches the next hand. Many misunderstand forgiveness as letting it slide. No, forgiveness is stopping the transmission. It's the moment you say, the pain ends here. I won't turn it into action, words, or new wounds. Look at your family. Is there a phrase repeated from grandparents to grandchildren? Men don't cry. Girls must be good. Money is everything. Those aren't just words. They're stones thrown from generation to generation, each toss adding a new crack. Forgiveness is picking up the stone, examining it closely, then setting it down instead of hurling it. You don't have to like the stone. You just need to stop making it fly. Some ask, but without punishment, how is justice served? Justice and forgiveness aren't enemies. Justice is the domain of law, society, natural consequences. Forgiveness is the heart's domain. A judge can sentence prison, but only you decide whether to carry that prison in your heart for life. Think of a garden. Weeds grow because the soil was neglected, seeds blown in from other gardens. Uprooting weeds is necessary, but if you yank in anger, you may harm the flowers growing beside them. Forgiveness is pulling weeds with gentle hands, leaving clean soil for new seeds. And what are those new seeds? Unconditional kindness. The apology you give your child, though you swore never to bow. The hug you offer your partner, though you were taught hugs are weakness. Every kind act is a shovel breaking the old chain. But don't expect the chain to snap instantly. It's been woven for thousands of years. One person stopping isn't enough to save the world, but it's enough to save themselves and those closest. A mother who chooses not to yell, though she was yelled at. A father who chooses to listen, though his grandfather said, men don't need words. Those moments are small, but they're the first cracks in a thick wall of hatred. There's an old story. A Zen master passes a burning village. Villagers shout, "Master, save us." He looks around, sees a child crying beside their mother's body. He picks up the child, places them in another woman's arms, and walks on. The villagers rage. "You didn't save the whole village?" The master replies, "I just saved the world. For if this child grew up in hatred, they would burn 1,000 more villages." Forgiveness is like that. It doesn't need to be grand. It just needs to be in the right place. A handshake instead of a punch. An I understand instead of you're wrong. A minute of silence instead of 10 minutes of arguing. Those moments are drops cooling the burning rope. And as you practice forgiveness, you'll discover a paradox. The first healed isn't the hurter, but you. Resentment is like acid. It corrodes the container before the contents. Forgiveness is a new container. But don't rush. Forgiveness isn't a sprint. Sometimes you forgive today, and tomorrow resentment sprouts like weeds after rain. That's normal. Life is a garden, not a museum. Weeds will regrow. You'll pull them again. Each pull leaves the soil a little cleaner, and one day you'll stand in a garden free of weeds, not because they vanished forever, but because you've learned to pull them before they become a forest. Eventually, you'll realize forgiveness is no longer something you do. It becomes how you are. Like breathing, you don't remind your lungs to contract and expand. They know. Forgiveness is the same. Once it's in your bones, you don't sit, close your eyes, chant, "I forgive" like a ritual. You just live. And forgiveness flows from there, quiet as an underground stream, nourishing a field. Imagine standing by a river at dawn. The water is mirror still, reflecting a misty sky. Suddenly a stone drops, ripples spread, push, overlap. That's the moment someone hurts you. The natural reaction is to pick another stone and throw back, then another, until the river is a storm. But if you learn to stand still, just stand still, what happens? The ripples still spread, still push, but gradually weaken, dissolve, and the surface flattens again. Not because you erased the first stone, but because you didn't fuel it. Forgiveness is that stillness, not helplessness, but the strength of one who knows every wave passes. And once you're used to stillness, you'll notice something strange. Stones others throw at you no longer rock you. They still fall, still ripple, but the waves don't reach your neck. You've learned to float. Some ask, how do I know I've truly forgiven? The answer is almost absurdly simple. You know when you no longer need to know. When the memory of an old wound arises and your heart doesn't clench. When their name is spoken and your mouth isn't bitter. When you can wish them well, not with hollow words, but with sincere silence in your heart, then you've forgiven. But don't seek that sign like a medal. Forgiveness isn't a destination, it's the path. Some days you walk fast, some days you rest under a tree. Some days you think you've arrived, then a cold wind blows and you're back at the start. It's all part of the journey. Remember, you don't forgive to become a saint. You forgive to become human. The real human, not the version caged in resentment's glass. The human who can laugh loudly without fear of cracking, cry without fear of drowning, love without fear of betrayal. And when you live from there, the world is no longer a battlefield. It's a classroom. Everyone you meet is a teacher in disguise. The grumpy vendor teaches patience. The driver who cuts you off teaches letting go. The ex teaches that love isn't possession. Every lesson hurts, but every lesson opens. Another story. An old man sits by a lake, tossing pebbles one by one. His grandson asks, "What are you doing?" He replies, "Each pebble is a grudge. When it sinks, I lighten a little." The boy picks a big pebble, hurls it hard. Waves splash wildly. The old man smiles. See? Throw hard, big waves. Throw gently, small waves. But sooner or later the pebble sinks. The question is whether you keep picking new pebbles. Forgiveness is stopping the picking of new pebbles. Not because the world runs out of pebbles, but because you've learned to walk barefoot without pain. And then, on an ordinary day, you'll realize you no longer distinguish forgiving myself from forgiving others. The boundary dissolves. You see that every mistake, every hurt, every darkness is a low note in the same melody. Without low notes, how can there be high? Without night, how can there be stars? This is where masters speak of sudden enlightenment, but don't wait for thunder or lightning. Enlightenment often comes quietly, like realizing you've forgotten your watch long ago. You no longer forgive, because there's nothing left to forgive. Only a gentle emptiness remains, where love grows like grass after rain. You don't need to believe in gods to live from there. You just need to believe the obvious truth. We're all children learning to walk in the dark, bumping walls, crying, then standing up. Some cry louder, some hide tears better, but all are learning. And when you see that clearly, you'll smile at yourself, at the stranger on the bus, at the one who hurt you deepest. That smile isn't condescension from above. It's the smile of recognition. Oh, we're on the same team. Forgiveness, in the end, is coming home. Home isn't a place without pain. Home is where pain no longer rules. Home is where you can fall without fear of exile, cry without fear of mockery, love without fear of rejection. So forgive, not tomorrow, not when you're ready. Forgive right now, in every breath.
There comes a time in every life when the idea of losing starts to feel familiar. You've done everything right, or at least tried to. You've followed the rules, set your intentions, given your best. And yet, the world doesn't seem to reward your persistence. You reach for things and they slip away. You open your heart and it gets bruised again. You try to grow, and still you find yourself circling the same lessons in different forms. It's in those moments that you begin to wonder, not in bitterness, but in quiet weariness, if any of it has meaning. What's strange, though, is that even in that weariness, something in you still shows up. You still wake up. You still breathe. You still try. It may not look like ambition anymore, but a quieter rhythm of being, not the roar of trying to win, but the whisper of simply continuing. That life is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be enjoyed. But when you've been losing for a long time, it's difficult to remember the dance. You start to think that life is testing you, that the repeated setbacks mean something personal, that the universe is keeping score. You look around and see others moving ahead while you seem to remain in place. That comparison cuts deeper than defeat itself. But what if you were never meant to win in the way you imagined? What if the whole idea of losing was an illusion born from the mind's addiction to measurement? The river doesn't lose when it bends. The wave doesn't fail when it falls back into the ocean. It's all the same movement. Every time you think you've lost, it's only because you were measuring life by something that was never stable: results, recognition, outcomes. But life isn't stable. It's alive. It breathes, it collapses, it blooms again. The flower doesn't think of the winter as a loss. It simply rests until it can rise again. When you're tired of losing but still show up, something beautiful begins to happen. The trying becomes quieter. The motives soften. You no longer push out of desperation, but from a kind of sincerity, not because you believe success will save you, but because it feels true to participate. You realize that effort itself can be a kind of devotion, even if it doesn't yield victory. And maybe that's what grace really is, showing up without knowing why, trusting that the act itself is enough. You see, the mind divides life into winners and losers, but life itself knows nothing of such divisions. It only moves. It expands. It contracts. It explores. What you call failure is just the other half of creation, the part that teaches humility, patience, surrender. Without it, there would be no wisdom, only vanity. When you've lost enough times, the ego begins to crack, and through those cracks, light starts to enter. You begin to see that the purpose of the loss was not to punish you, but to soften you, to make you less certain that you were ever in control. And in that softening, you start to discover a deeper kind of strength, not the will to dominate circumstances, but the capacity to remain open within them. Imagine standing in the rain. You can curse the weather, fight to stay dry, or you can simply let yourself get wet. At first it's uncomfortable, but soon something shifts, the fight leaves you, and what's left is sensation, coolness, texture, aliveness. You realize the rain isn't against you. It's just happening, and so are you. That's what happens when you stop treating loss as an enemy. You start to live again. You start to see that showing up, even soaked and tired, is its own kind of victory. You may not realize it, but every time you get back up, you're demonstrating something sacred, that consciousness is resilient. That awareness cannot truly be defeated. Even when everything falls apart, the part of you that watches it fall remains untouched. That witnessing presence, that's who you really are. The rest is just the story of a character learning how to love impermanence. When you begin to see from that stillness, losing takes on a different flavor. It's no longer humiliation, it's revelation. It shows you where you were attached, where you mistook temporary forms for truth. Each loss removes a mask. Each setback peels away another layer of illusion. And eventually, what's left is not a winner or a loser, but a being at peace with the game itself. You begin to understand that the act of showing up, even tired, even uncertain, is what life has been trying to teach you all along. To show up not as a conqueror, but as a participant. To move not for gain, but because movement is your nature. When you show up like that, even losing feels sacred, because you see that nothing was ever truly lost. It only changed shape. The effort transformed into learning, the failure into compassion, the exhaustion into stillness. If there is one secret the universe whispers to those who keep showing up, it's this: you are not being tested, you are being tempered. Life isn't interested in breaking you, it's teaching you to bend. And so, every time you think you can't take another loss, another setback, another disappointment, notice that somehow you still do. You're still breathing. You're still here. That is not weakness, that's grace. You've mistaken it for endurance, but it's something far more subtle. It's the quiet understanding that your worth was never tied to winning. That life's invitation was never to succeed, but to participate in its unfolding with open eyes and an undefended heart. When you understand that, losing stops feeling like the end of something. It becomes a pause, a reorientation, the silence between notes in the music of becoming. And in that silence, you might find something you've been missing, not success, but peace. There's a rhythm you start to notice after losing enough times. It's not loud. It's almost hidden beneath the noise of disappointment. At first, all you hear is the echo of your own frustration, that voice inside that says, I can't keep doing this. But if you listen long enough, the echo fades and you begin to hear something quieter, a pulse, a kind of still music beneath the struggle. That pulse is life continuing through you, no matter what. It's what keeps you standing up when every part of you wants to stop. It doesn't care about results. It doesn't even care about hope. It just moves. It's the same energy that brings the tide back after the retreat, that pushes the seed to crack open even in barren soil. You don't control it. You are it. When you begin to sense that, losing no longer feels final. You start to see that every so-called failure has been shaping you into something softer, wiser, more real. You realize that it's not your strength that kept you going, but life itself expressing through you. The truth is, you never chose to keep showing up. You were chosen by something deeper than will, the part of you that knows that even heartbreak is worth feeling if it means being alive. There's a certain beauty in that surrender. It's not dramatic. It doesn't shout or seek recognition. It's the quiet dignity of still showing up to life, even when no one is watching, when there's nothing to win, nothing to prove. You start to understand that perhaps showing up is all life ever asked for. The sun doesn't rise to win the sky. The waves don't move to impress the shore. They show up because that's their nature. And maybe that's your nature too, to move, to try, to feel, to fall, and to rise again. When you're tired of losing, the temptation is to stop caring, to withdraw your tenderness. But that's how the heart hardens. What life invites instead is a different kind of caring, not the effortful caring that drains you, but the open caring that flows without expectation. There is a form of strength that only comes when you stop defending against pain, the kind that no longer needs to be right or successful or admired. It's the strength that lives in vulnerability, the strength that says, even if I fall again, I will not close. That's what the universe recognizes, not your victories, but your willingness to stay open. Because openness, no matter how tired, is a kind of prayer. If you've been losing, it doesn't mean you're doing life wrong. It might mean you're finally doing it honestly. When pretense falls away, so does certainty, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered experience of being human. It's messy, it's painful, but it's real. And in that realness, you find something that winning could never give you: intimacy with existence itself. The people who seem to have everything often live on the surface of life. Those who have lost, who have been stripped bare, are the ones who touch its depth. They know how fragile joy is, how precious ordinary moments are. They've been to the bottom, and they know there's no treasure there except understanding. When you stop running from that understanding, a new kind of peace begins to bloom. It's not the peace of control or success, but the peace of being at home in your own imperfection. You start to smile at your mistakes. You begin to see the humor in your old seriousness. You realize that life was never mocking you, it was teaching you to laugh. You remember how children play. They lose constantly, and it never matters. They fall, they cry, they get up, and the game goes on. Somewhere along the line, you forgot that the game was meant to be played that way. The spiritual path, in truth, is a return to that innocence. It's not about transcending failure. It's about rediscovering the joy of participating. So when you wake up tomorrow and feel that familiar heaviness, that whisper that says, I can't keep doing this, remember that you don't need to do it in the same way. You can show up differently, softer, slower, without the armor. Show up not as a fighter, but as a witness. Show up not to conquer the day, but to meet it. There's no need to fix everything today or ever. The ocean doesn't fix the shore. It just arrives again and again until the rocks themselves soften. That's how life shapes you, through the persistence of presence. You'll find that once you stop demanding results, something inside you starts to rest. The exhaustion that once felt endless begins to lighten. You realize that you don't need to win anymore. You just need to be here. And strangely enough, that's when life starts moving in your favor, not because you forced it, but because you stopped resisting it. When you stop trying to make everything happen, you create space for things to unfold. What once felt like loss begins to look like redirection. What once felt like stagnation begins to look like stillness. You discover that every time you showed up through your fatigue, you weren't proving your worth, you were remembering it. The part of you that still rises, still participates, still believes in beauty, even when everything hurts, that part is untouched by defeat. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need reward. It simply is. That's the real victory. And one day, when you look back, you'll see that what you called losing was actually the slow removal of everything false. What remained, what kept showing up, was the truest part of you. So yes, you may be tired of losing, but you have not been losing. You've been learning how to live without needing to win. And that, quietly, is how you begin to win without trying. There's something extraordinary that begins to happen when you finally stop fighting the story of your life. You still wake up each morning. You still face the same uncertainties, but the air around everything feels different. It's as though the tension in the invisible threads that held you to an idea of success has loosened. You still show up, but now there's a softness in the gesture. You begin to understand that showing up was never about proving your strength. It was about remembering your belonging. You see, most people misunderstand perseverance. They think it means clinging, forcing, pushing through until something changes. But true perseverance is quieter than that. It's not the will to keep moving for the sake of progress. It's the willingness to stay present even when nothing makes sense. It's staying in the room with life itself, even when every instinct says to run. When you've lost enough, something begins to purify in you. Your ambitions, once sharp and demanding, start to melt into something gentler. You no longer need to chase validation. You no longer need to prove that your path is correct. You begin to notice that even your failures have been faithful companions. Each one came to reveal another layer of illusion, another place where you were confusing effort with essence. There's a curious grace in those moments when you realize that you can't keep controlling outcomes. A kind of surrender arises, not because you've given up, but because you've seen through the futility of grasping. When you let go of control, you begin to see that life never needed it. The river knows where to turn, the wind knows where to blow, the tree knows when to let its leaves fall. You don't need to direct it. You only need to participate in its rhythm. That participation is what it means to show up. It doesn't require enthusiasm or certainty. It only asks for presence. There are days when your showing up will look like joy and creativity, and there are days when it will look like simply breathing. Both are equal in the eyes of life. The human mind loves to measure, to rank, to name one thing better than another. But in the vastness of being, All expressions have their place. The sunlight and the rain both belong. The laughter and the silence are both sacred. You begin to realize that there is no such thing as wasted effort, because every movement teaches you something about the nature of flow. When you stop seeing life as a contest, your heart begins to open again. It's as though an old wound starts to breathe. You realize that most of your exhaustion was not from doing, but from trying to make everything mean something. You were asking each moment to justify its existence, and in doing so you missed the beauty of simply being here. There's an old saying that enlightenment is not about becoming divine, but about becoming fully human. To feel deeply, to fall, to rise, to care, to let go, that's the real dance. When you participate in life without demanding victory, you start to sense a quiet joy emerging from the simplest acts. Making a meal, holding a hand, watching light move through leaves. There's no grandeur in these moments, and yet they carry a tenderness that nothing else can match. That tenderness is the beginning of peace. It comes when you no longer divide the world into what should be and what is. You see, all suffering begins with resistance to what is. You believe that things should have gone differently, that you should have been further along, that life should have been kinder. But the moment you stop arguing with reality, something miraculous happens. The pain doesn't disappear, but it softens. It becomes a companion instead of an enemy. And from that softness, wisdom begins to grow, not the kind that comes from knowledge or experience, but the wisdom that comes from allowing. It's the kind of knowing that whispers, "This too belongs." You start to see how even your losses were forms of guidance. Each door that closed was protecting you from walking where you weren't meant to go. Each disappointment was redirecting you towards something your mind couldn't yet imagine. Every person who left was teaching you the difference between attachment and love. Love, in its truest form, is not possession or certainty. It's participation without guarantee. To love is to show up even when you might lose, even when there's no promise of return. And that's what makes it sacred. You realize that life itself is a love affair, wild, unpredictable, sometimes devastating, but always alive. And to keep showing up for it, even when it breaks your heart, is to honor its mystery. There's a passage in the Tao Te Ching that says, "Do your work, then step back, the only path to serenity." For years, that sounded to me like resignation. But what it really means is that serenity doesn't come from withdrawal, it comes from trust. When you step back, you make room for life to breathe through you instead of around you. You stop trying to pull meaning from the world and start allowing meaning to reveal itself. That's why so many of your greatest moments come after surrender. You reach the edge of your own endurance, and in that collapse, something else takes over. The effort stops, and in its place arrives grace. You realize that the power you were seeking to cultivate was never yours to begin with. It was always the universe moving through you. You don't need to generate it. You only need to stop blocking it. When you act from that understanding, life becomes lighter. You still work, you still strive, but the strain is gone. You move as a musician plays, not because you have to, but because it feels natural. Even when the melody changes, you keep playing, because that's what the song demands. That is the grace of showing up. It's not about heroism, it's about harmony. To show up with grace is to no longer treat life as something to conquer, but as something to accompany. You stop demanding perfection from yourself or others. You stop trying to manipulate timing. You learn to bow to the seasons of becoming. There will be days when you fall apart again. That's part of it. You'll wake up feeling heavy, lost, uncertain. But now you'll know that even this is sacred. You'll see that you can be tired and still present, confused and still kind. That's what it means to live awake. Life never promised you clarity. It only promised you experience. And the willingness to experience it fully, without turning away, is what makes you whole. So, if you are tired of losing, but still find yourself showing up, remember this: you are already succeeding in the only way that matters. You are participating in the mystery with your heart open. You are letting life live through you. You may not see it, but every breath you take in that awareness ripples outward. Somewhere, someone else feels less alone because you kept showing up. Somewhere, the world softens because you chose to stay. And maybe that's what winning really is, not triumph over life, but union with it. You'll still fall, you'll still lose, you'll still forget. But you'll also remember, again and again, that it was never about being invincible. It was about being present. When the next moment of defeat comes, meet it gently. Don't analyze it. Don't rush to overcome it. Just breathe and say, "Ah, this too." Then step into the next moment, and the next, and the next. You'll find that showing up isn't something you do, it's what you are. Even when you're tired, even when you think you've lost, life continues through you. And that continuation, that quiet persistence, is the heartbeat of existence itself. You don't need to know where it's leading. You just need to walk with it. And somewhere along the way, you'll look around and realize you were never losing. You were only being shaped. You were only being loved in a way that demanded you let go of every illusion of control. You were never meant to win against life. You were meant to dance with it. And even now, as you stand there, tired but present, you are already dancing.
It's just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. Yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. Have you ever noticed that suffering is not so much in the pain itself, but in the way we cling to it, resist it, and try to escape from it? It's curious, isn't it? The moment you resist a thing, you magnify it. The moment you push against a thought, you give it strength. And so much of what we call suffering isn't in the rain that falls upon us, but in the way we curse the storm. Now, I'm not suggesting that life is free of difficulty. Far from it. Life has always been a dance of opposites. Pain and pleasure, gain and loss, birth and death, they are as inseparable as the front and the back of a coin. But here is the trick. You see, suffering is not the same as pain. Pain is simply what is. The sting of loss, the ache of the body, the tears of parting, these are natural as the tides. But suffering is the story we weave around it. It is the why me. It is the clinging, the holding on, the desperate attempt to control what was never in our control. There is an old saying in Zen, let go or be dragged. And this is precisely the matter at hand. When you stop clutching, when you let the river flow, you find that the water carries you. But when you stiffen, when you insist on paddling against the current, you exhaust yourself. And then, of course, you call that exhaustion suffering. Now imagine this for a moment. Suppose you are sitting in a concert hall, listening to the most marvelous symphony. The violins rise, the horns call, the drums thunder, and then there are those soft silences between notes. If you tried to cling to one particular note, one particular moment, you would miss the music entirely. And yet that is what so many of us do with life. We clutch to the past, we resist the present, and we demand that the future turn out just so. And in this struggle, we suffer. Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. Isn't that delightful? You stir up the pond, and then you panic, wondering why you cannot see. But if you would only stop meddling, if you would let the water settle on its own, it becomes clear again. This is the essence of ending suffering. To stop trying to force clarity, to stop grasping for control, to let life be. And yet, here comes the paradox. The very moment you try to let go, you will find yourself grasping at letting go. You will say, I must stop suffering, I must drop it, I must let it go. And suddenly, suffering is right back in the room, laughing at you. So, what do? You don't do. You notice, you watch. You become aware of this game you are playing. And in that very awareness, a kind of miracle happens. The grasping begins to loosen on its own. This is why I often say, man suffers only because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun. Life is a game, a play, a cosmic hide and seek. You are it, pretending not to be it. You are the universe playing at being a person. And the moment you recognize that this whole drama isn't meant to be taken with such deadly seriousness, you begin to laugh at your suffering. And what happens when you laugh? You loosen, you breathe, you live. Think of a child. A child falls, scrapes its knee, and within moments they are up again, laughing, running. The pain is there, yes, but it has not yet solidified into suffering. Why? Because the child has not learned to weave long stories about it. They haven't yet learned to cling. But we as adults become very good at storytelling. We carry our wounds like treasures, retelling them, protecting them, building identities around them. And in this endless narration, we suffer far more than the original wound ever required. So let me tell you a story. One you may have heard before, but it bears repeating. There was once a Chinese farmer. One day, his horse ran away, and the neighbors came and said, "Oh, that's too bad." And the farmer simply replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it 7 wild horses, and the neighbors came again and said, "Why, how wonderful!" And the farmer said, "Maybe." The day after, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses, and he was thrown off, breaking his leg. The neighbors rushed in, "Oh, that's terrible." And again, the farmer said, "Maybe." The very next day, conscription officers came, looking for young men to draft into the army. But because the son had a broken leg, they passed him by. And the neighbors cried, "How fortunate!" And the farmer, as always, replied, "Maybe." Now, the point of this story is not about being clever or detached. It's about seeing that life is endlessly unfolding, and our judgments of good and bad, fortunate and unfortunate, are terribly short-sighted. When you see this, you begin to loosen your grip on things. You stop suffering over each twist of the plot, because you realize you are not meant to judge the story, you are meant to experience it. Man is a little bit afraid. He wonders what will happen next. But that is precisely the adventure. The attempt to escape suffering is often the very root of it. You fear the unknown, you fear loss, you fear death. But all of these are part of the adventure. The trick, you see, is not to get rid of the storm, but to learn to dance in the rain, not to abolish the silence, but to hear the music within it, not to conquer death, but to realize that death is what makes life so exquisitely alive. And so, if you wish to stop suffering now, don't begin with the attempt to rearrange life. Begin with the way you see it. Look at the river, look at the sky, look at your own thoughts, rising and falling like clouds, and see they were never under your control anyway. When you allow them to flow, you discover a strange thing. Suffering evaporates, and in its place there is a kind of deep, wordless peace. It is not the peace of having solved everything, but the peace of no longer needing to. The more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless. Suffering comes from our desperate attempt to make the impermanent permanent. We want the joy without the loss, the life without the death, the gain without the risk. But this is to want a one-sided coin, and a one-sided coin does not exist. When you see this, when you truly see it, you stop fighting the rhythm of life, and in that moment suffering dissolves. So perhaps the invitation is not to escape suffering, but to see through it, to recognize it as a trick of the mind, a tightening where loosening is possible. And in this recognition, right here, right now, you are free. So we have this feeling of being a lonely little me, inside a bag of skin, looking out at a world that is foreign and often threatening. We feel that we came into this world. But did you? Or did you come out of it? Like an apple comes out of an apple tree. Have you noticed this peculiar illusion we carry? The sense that we are strangers in the universe, accidental visitors, isolated egos inside these fragile shells of flesh. We imagine ourselves tossed into a world that does not belong to us, that is indifferent or hostile. And because of this illusion, we feel lonely. We feel afraid. We feel the weight of being a separate self, adrift in a vast, uncaring cosmos. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly, Did you really come into this world? Or did you come out of it? Just as a leaf comes out of a branch, just as the wave rises out of the sea, the universe has been unfolding for billions of years. And here you are, a blossoming, an expression, a ripple in its eternal dance. You are not a visitor. You are the happening itself. Consider the wave. A wave curls upon the ocean surface. It rises, takes form, gathers strength, and if it could think, it might say, "Look at me. I am a wave. I am important, separate, special." But the wave also fears. It sees its own end approaching as it tumbles toward the shore. It trembles at the crash, thinking it will vanish forever, and so it suffers. But what the wave forgets, what we forget, is that it is never separate from the ocean. Its water is the ocean's water. Its motion is the ocean's motion. The crash upon the shore is not the end of the wave, but a transformation. It returns to the sea, just as it always was the sea. You are that wave. You may call yourself by a name, John or Jane, but your true identity is oceanic. You are the universe itself, playing at being a temporary ripple. And when you see this, fear dissolves. Loneliness fades, because you realize you cannot fall out of the ocean. You cannot be lost. You are the ocean, forever folding into new forms. Now let's deepen this. The universe is not merely ocean, but a great play of opposites. Light and dark, sound and silence, life and death. We live in a system of polarity. The crest of the wave cannot exist without the trough. The heartbeat itself, systole and diastole, contraction and expansion. If the heart stopped alternating, you would not be alive. Yet what do? We try to cling to one side and reject the other. We worship the light but curse the darkness. We chase pleasure but resist pain. We want to live but we fear death. And here is the trick. You cannot have one without the other. It's like trying to play a game of chess with only white pieces, or trying to listen to music with only sound and no silence. The opposites define one another. Without the background of night, the stars would not shine. Without silence, music would be meaningless. Without death, life would lose its urgency, its beauty. But suffering arises when we forget this is a game, when we treat one side as an enemy to be conquered, rather than a partner in the dance. The yin-yang symbol, you see, is not static. It's always turning, always flowing. The black contains the seed of white, and the white contains the seed of black. They chase one another like lovers, like dancers. The universe is not at war with itself. It is in love with itself. It is playing, it is dancing. And you are one of its graceful movements. Now let's take another metaphor. Imagine life as a grand theater. The curtain rises, the actors step onto the stage, and the play begins. To be a good actor, you must believe in your role. If you are playing the tragic hero, you must weep real tears. If you are playing the clown, you must laugh with all your heart. But the great actor never forgets. This is a role. The tears are real, yet they are also play. When the curtain falls, the actor steps off stage, removes the costume, and goes home. Now here is the human predicament. We have forgotten we are actors. We are stuck on the stage, utterly convinced the play is reality itself. We take our role as John or Mary with such seriousness, such gravity, that we suffer as if the play were eternal. But what happens when you remember, when you see that the role is temporary, that the curtain will fall? You do not stop acting. In fact, you act even better, because you can give yourself fully to the role, knowing it is not the whole of you. You are not just the actor, you are the audience, watching the play unfold. You are the playwright, weaving the story. You are the stage itself, upon which the drama appears. And when you realize this, the tragedy loses its sting. The comedy sparkles. And even the sorrows of life become part of the magnificent performance. But perhaps the deepest illusion of all is the sense of separation. This feeling of being a lonely little me, trapped in a bag of skin, peering out at a world that is other. Science will tell you quite correctly that your body is made of stardust, that the iron in your blood was forged in the heart of stars that exploded billions of years ago, that the breath you inhale right now was exhaled by trees, and the breath you exhale is food for them. You are not separate from the environment. You are the environment. You don't live in the universe. You are the universe, living as this particular form for a little while. The illusion of being separate is the root of fear, and thus the root of suffering. Because if you believe you are only this fragile ego, you must constantly defend it, protect it, cling to it, and of course it feels terrifying to lose it. But when you see through the illusion, when you realize you are the ocean, the wave, the actor, the stage, the whole cosmic drama, then death itself loses its teeth. Because how can the universe lose itself? It is only changing costume, only shifting masks, only moving from one dance to another. Let me share with you one final image. The Hindus say the universe is a game of hide and seek. God, or Brahman, hides from himself by becoming us, by becoming the world of forms, by pretending to be you and forgetting. Why? Because there is no fun in playing a game where you already know the ending. So the self hides from itself, takes on the disguise of you, and pretends to be lost. And the whole adventure of life is the thrill of seeking. But sooner or later, the game reaches its turning point. The mask slips, the curtain is lifted, and you remember, it was me all along. I was the seeker and the sought, the hider and the finder, the player in the game. And then you laugh, because you realize suffering was never more than forgetting the playful nature of it all. You are the aperture through which the universe is looking at itself and exploring itself, and when you know this, not as an idea, but as a lived reality, life transforms. The fear of death loosens, the grip of loneliness fades, the seriousness of suffering dissolves, because you remember, you are not merely in the cosmos, you are the cosmos, and this whole drama, with its joys and sorrows, is your play. So how does one stop suffering now? The ego's first instinct is to find a method, a technique, a new thing to do, to try even harder to control the game. But that is like a person trapped in quicksand, struggling. It only sinks them deeper. The way is not to grasp, but to let go. We human beings are funny creatures. When faced with the challenge of suffering, our first thought is always, what should I do? We want a prescription, a technique, a map. We want some clever method that will finally fix it all. But do you see the trick here? The very one who is suffering, the grasping, anxious self, is the one trying to end suffering. It's like a dog chasing its own tail, or like a man in quicksand who thrashes and flails, only to sink deeper with every effort. The harder you try to be free, the more tightly you bind yourself. Because the very act of trying is rooted in resistance, and resistance is the seed of suffering. This is why control never quite works. You say to yourself, I must let go, I must relax, I must trust, and already you are clutching at relaxation, grasping at trust, forcing yourself to let go. It's absurd, isn't it? And yet, this is the human predicament. We try to control the uncontrollable. We try to clutch the river with our hands. And then we wonder why we come up empty. Letting go is not something you do. It is what happens when you see that there is nothing to hold on to. It's like opening your hand and realizing it was empty all along. It is that we are constantly labeling events as good or bad, fortunate or unfortunate, based on a tiny sliver of perspective. But the truth is, we do not know. We cannot know. The story is still unfolding. Our endless judgments, our compulsive labeling, they are the very roots of anxiety. We live in constant tension, afraid of what may come, desperate to hold on to what we call good, terrified of what we call bad. But if we could live like the farmer, with that soft smile of maybe, suffering would dissolve like morning mist. So then, what is the alternative? If not control, if not judgment, what is left? Attention. Pure, unfiltered, childlike attention. Instead of trying to change what is, try simply to look at it. Feel the anxiety in your chest. Don't call it bad. Don't try to fix it. Just feel it as it is. Listen to the sound of the rain on the roof. Don't call it pleasant. Don't call it unpleasant. Just listen. Look at the light filtering through the trees. Don't say, how beautiful. Don't say, how ordinary. Just look. And when you do this, something miraculous happens. The world, which had grown flat and gray, suddenly becomes alive again. Everything shimmers with mystery, as if seen for the first time. You become like a child, and for a child, everything is gee whiz. The most ordinary pebble is a jewel. The most common insect is a dragon. The whole world is vibrant, alive, radiant. Now, I must warn you to live this way feels like living without a net, because the ego desperately wants guarantees. It wants security, certainty, a safety rope to cling to. But life offers no such thing, and that, my friends, is its beauty. The tree does not ask for a guarantee of spring. It simply blossoms. The bird does not demand a contract with the sky. It simply spreads its wings and flies. Living without a net is to realize you don't actually have to let go, because there is nothing to hold on to. There never was. You see, all along, you have been like a man clutching at empty air, imagining it was a rope. And when you finally look, you laugh because there is nothing to release. You are already free. This is the wisdom of unknowing. We are so desperate to know, to pin down, to fix, to explain. But what if we could rest in the vastness of not knowing? What if we could meet each moment without the burden of labels, without the need for certainty? Then life would not be a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The river flows, and you flow with it. The wind blows, and you bend with it. The stars burn, and you burn with them. There is no plan to follow, no secret key to find. There is only this moment, this breath, this dance. And when you see this, you discover a peace deeper than answers. The peace of not needing to know, the peace of simply being. And here comes the final joke of it all. The very thing you have been searching for, freedom, peace, the end of suffering, was never hiding. It was here all along. It's like looking for your own head. You can twist and turn, peer into every mirror, ask every teacher, but you will never see it directly, because it is what you are looking from. In the same way, you are the very freedom you seek. You are the very peace you long for. You are it. Always, already here. And the moment you stop searching, the moment you stop touching, you see it like a joke that was waiting all along. And then perhaps you laugh. The real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real deep down you is the whole universe. And when you realize this, that there is no rope to grasp, no net to fall into, no separate self to protect, you stop struggling, you stop suffering, and you live. Not tomorrow, not when you figured it all out, but now, always now. So here we are, my friends, at the final turn of this little journey together. We began with a knot, the knot of suffering, the sense that you are a lonely little creature, cast adrift in a vast and hostile universe. And perhaps along the way you've noticed that knot beginning to loosen. Not by force, not by pulling at it, but simply by seeing it for what it is, an illusion. You see, all along, the suffering was not in life itself, but in the way we held on to it. The way we tried to freeze the dance into a still photograph. The way we insisted on being the permanent guest in an impermanent party. And life, of course, refuses. Life moves, it dances, it breathes. And so our suffering was the friction between our demand for solidity and the universe's endless fluidity. Now, let us tie the threads together. We began with separation, a skin-encapsulated ego, looking out through the eyes as if through tiny windows, fearing the world outside. We discovered that this little self, this lonely I, is no more than a mask, a role in a play. And behind the mask, why, behind the mask is the entire theater, the stage, the lights, the script, the orchestra, the audience. All of it is you playing hide and seek with itself. And what a marvelous trick it is to hide from yourself so thoroughly that you can forget your true nature, only to rediscover it with a rush of laughter and tears. For what is enlightenment but a cosmic game of peekaboo? You hid, and now you see. And so, let me remind you of something very important. Life is not a journey with some grand prize at the end. It is a symphony. You don't play the symphony to get to the end of it. No one listens to Beethoven's Ninth and says, "Oh, I can't wait for the final note." That would be absurd. No, you listen for the play of notes, the rise and fall, the silence between the sounds. Life is precisely like that. It is a song. And you are invited to sing along, not to rush to the final chord. The meaning, you see, is not waiting at the finish line. The meaning is now, in the laughing child, in the sound of rain against the window, in the pulse of your own breath. The tragedy of human suffering is that we forget the music and try to turn it into a race. We strain to arrive, all the while missing the very thing we came for, the dancing of the notes. And this is why, you see, the masters, the sages, the poets, they laugh. They laugh not because they mock life, but because they finally got the joke. They realized that there was nothing to get. Now, think for a moment of a dancer. A dancer does not dance to arrive at a particular spot on the floor. If they did, the quickest way would be to walk directly there. No, the dancer dances because the movement itself is the delight. So too with the universe. It does not spin galaxies into being because it needs them to arrive somewhere. It spins because spinning is its joy. You are not here to accomplish some divine checklist. You are here because the cosmos could not resist the artistry of making a you. You are its pirouette, its laughter, its brushstroke of color. But remember this, the dance always includes its opposite. The spin requires the stillness. The music requires the silence. The wave requires the trough. So don't imagine that to live in harmony means to avoid sorrow, or to escape death, or to outrun the shadow. To live is to embrace the shadow as the partner of the light, to hold both hands in the dance. Suffering only arises when we insist on clinging to one hand and rejecting the other. Think once more of the wave. The wave rises, curls, and crashes, and all the while it trembles, saying, I must not end. I must hold myself together. But the truth is, the wave never ends. Its water was the ocean all along. When it falls, it simply returns to itself. And you, dear listener, are precisely the same. You are not something apart from this grand ocean of being. You are the ocean waving. And when you fall, you do not end, you return. So, breathe. And in that breath, realize it is not you breathing. It is the cosmos breathing through you. And so, perhaps you wonder, what am I to do now? And the marvelous answer is, nothing in particular. Or rather, everything. There is no prescribed action, no secret key, no final step. The great relief of awakening is that life no longer needs to be conquered. You don't need to force it into meaning. It is meaning already. Just as a flower does not bloom with an agenda, you do not need one either. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a mystery to be lived. Try this. Tomorrow morning, as you step outside, don't name anything you see. Don't call it tree, don't call it bird, don't call it sky. Just look, just listen. Let the universe wash over you, without the filter of labels. You will find it is alive, shimmering miraculous, because you have stopped trying to make it fit into the tight little boxes of thought. So let me invite you now, the next time anxiety rises, see if you can notice it not as an enemy, but as a ripple in the dance. The next time sorrow comes, see if you can cradle it gently, like a violin note in the symphony. And the next time joy visits, welcome it, but don't cling to it. Let it pass too, for everything is part of the rhythm. Remember, you are not merely listening to the music, you are the music. Let us end, then, with this. You are a function of what the whole universe is doing. In the same way, a wave is a function of what the whole ocean is doing. You are not a puppet dangling on strings, nor a stranger lost in a foreign land. You are the land, the strings, the puppeteer, the play, the laughter, the tears. So when you suffer, remember, it is the universe stretching itself into form, into contrast, into dance. And when you let go, you realize that you were never separate at all. So go now, not with heavy commandments, but with curiosity. Look out the window. See the sky, the leaves, the people passing by. Hear the hum of life around you. Don't name it, don't judge it, just let it sing to you. For in the end, there is no end. Only the eternal music, the endless dance of energy. And in that knowing, suffering dissolves. Right here, right now. You know, one of the most peculiar and yet most inevitable experiences on the path of awakening is the discovery that you are changing in ways that others around you are not. And this creates a very strange predicament. It's rather like what happens when a caterpillar begins to transform into a butterfly while still surrounded by caterpillars who are quite content to remain caterpillars. Now, I want to talk about this because it's something that almost everyone who begins to wake up will encounter. And it can be one of the most isolating, confusing, and yes, dangerous experiences you'll face. Not dangerous in the sense that you'll come to physical harm necessarily, though that has happened throughout history. But dangerous in the sense that you may lose everything that once gave you a sense of belonging, identity, and security. Let me begin by saying that growth is not comfortable. It never has been, and it never will be. When a lobster outgrows its shell, it must shed that shell and expose itself, soft and vulnerable, until a new shell forms. During that time, it is in grave danger. Every predator in the ocean would love to make a meal of a soft-shelled lobster. But if the lobster refuses to shed its shell, if it clings to the safety of what it knows, it cannot grow. It will remain stunted, confined, unable to realize its full potential. Human beings are much the same way. We outgrow our shells, our beliefs, our relationships, our ways of understanding the world, and when we do, we become vulnerable. We lose the protection of the crowd, the comfort of conformity, the security of being like everyone else. And this vulnerability, this exposure, is what I mean by danger. Now, what does it mean to outgrow those around you? It doesn't mean that you've become superior, or that you're better than they are. This is a trap that many people fall into, and it's a sign that they haven't really grown at all. They've simply traded one form of ego inflation for another. No, outgrowing others means that you've begun to see things that they don't see yet, that you've asked questions they haven't asked, that you've stepped out of the agreed-upon framework of reality while they remain comfortably within it. Perhaps you've begun to question the values that everyone takes for granted. The pursuit of wealth, status, security, the accumulation of possessions, the endless distractions and entertainments that fill up our lives. Perhaps you've begun to see that these things don't lead to happiness, that they're empty promises, that they're symptoms of a deeper malaise, a fundamental misunderstanding about what life is and what we are. Or perhaps you've had experiences through meditation, through contemplation, through crisis, through psychedelics, through some spontaneous opening that have shown you that reality is far more mysterious, far more fluid, far more consciousness dependent than the solid, objective, external world that everyone believes in. You've seen through the illusion of the separate self, or at least caught a glimpse behind the curtain, and now you can't unsee it. When this happens, you find yourself in a very odd position. You're living in two worlds simultaneously. There's the conventional world, the world of commerce and politics and daily routine, the world where everyone is playing their roles and taking it all very seriously. And then there's this other dimension, this deeper reality, that's always present but that most people are completely oblivious to. And you must learn to navigate both worlds. You must learn to speak two languages, the language of the marketplace and the language of the mystic. You must learn to be in the world but not of it, as the old saying goes. And this is extraordinarily difficult because the two worlds have different rules, different values, different ways of making sense of experience. The people around you, your family, your friends, your colleagues, they're still operating entirely within the conventional framework. They're concerned with their careers, their mortgages, their social standing, their plans for the future. And these concerns, which once seemed so important to you, now seem rather trivial, rather beside the point. Not because you've become callous or indifferent, but because you've seen that there are deeper questions, more fundamental issues at stake. But you can't simply tell them this. You can't sit down with your family at dinner and say, I've realized that the self is an illusion and that we're all manifestations of one universal consciousness. They'll look at you as if you've lost your mind. And in a sense, you've lost the conventional mind, the socially conditioned mind, and you haven't yet fully articulated what you found in its place. So you remain silent, or you speak in hints and suggestions, or you try to find people who understand what you're going through. And this is where the isolation begins. Because the people you've known all your life, the people you love and care about, increasingly seem to be living in a different reality than you are. You're speaking different languages, pursuing different goals, seeing the world through entirely different lenses. And they sense this, even if they can't articulate it. They sense that you're no longer quite one of them, that you've changed in some fundamental way, that you're not playing the game with the same enthusiasm you once had. And this makes them uncomfortable. It threatens them. Because if you can step outside the agreed-upon framework, then maybe the framework isn't as solid as they thought. Maybe their own lives are built on sand. They may respond in various ways. Some will try to pull you back, to normalize you, to get you to be the way you used to be. You've changed, they'll say, and it won't be a compliment. They'll accuse you of becoming strange, impractical, irresponsible, self-absorbed. They'll remind you of your duties, your obligations, your place in the social order. They'll do everything they can to squeeze you back into the box you've outgrown. Others will simply distance themselves from you. They'll find you boring or preachy or incomprehensible. The conversations that once flowed easily now feel forced and superficial. You have less and less in common. The friendship or relationship gradually withers, not through any dramatic break, but through a slow, sad drifting apart. Still others may become hostile. This is particularly true if you've outgrown a religious or ideological framework that they're still invested in. If you were raised in a particular faith and you've moved beyond it, if you've questioned the dogmas and found them wanting, your very existence becomes a threat to those who still believe. You're a heretic, an apostate, a lost soul who must be saved or shunned. This is the danger I'm speaking of. Not that you'll be physically harmed necessarily, though that can happen, but that you'll lose your community, your tribe, your sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. Human beings are social creatures. We need connection. We need to feel that we're part of a group, that we're understood and accepted. And when you outgrow those around you, you risk losing all of that. Now, you might say, well, why not just keep quiet about it? Why not simply maintain the facade, play along, keep your insights to yourself? And many people do exactly this. They live double lives. They maintain the conventional appearance while privately knowing that it's all a game, all a performance. And there's a certain wisdom in this approach. As I said earlier, you don't shake someone awake from a pleasant dream unless the house is on fire. But there are problems with this strategy as well. First, it's exhausting. Living a double life, constantly monitoring what you say, editing your thoughts, pretending to care about things that no longer matter to you, this takes a tremendous toll. You become alienated from yourself, split, fragmented. The very integration and wholeness you've been seeking through your spiritual growth becomes impossible because you're constantly betraying your own truth. Second, it's inauthentic. And authenticity, being true to what you've discovered, is essential to the spiritual path. If you've seen something true, something real, and you hide it, deny it, refuse to live by it, then what was the point of seeing it in the first place? You become like someone who's discovered a treasure but is too afraid to spend it, so they bury it in the ground and continue to live in poverty. Third, and perhaps most importantly, your very presence. Even if you say nothing, communicate something. People pick up on energy, on vibration, on the unspoken. If you've genuinely transformed, if you've genuinely outgrown the conventional framework, it will show in 1,000 subtle ways in the quality of your attention, in your responses to crisis and difficulty, in what you laugh at, in what you take seriously, in the way you move through the world. So you're faced with a dilemma. You can't go back, you can't unsee what you've seen, unknow what you've known. But you can't fully go forward either. At least not without consequences, without losses, without a period of profound loneliness and disorientation. This is what the mystics have always called the dark night of the soul. It's the passage between the old life and the new, the death of the caterpillar before the emergence of the butterfly. And it's dark precisely because you've left behind the familiar landmarks, the comfortable certainties, but you haven't yet arrived at the new dispensation. You're in between, in limbo, in the wilderness. During this time, you may feel utterly alone. You may wonder if you've made a terrible mistake, if you've thrown away everything valuable for some nebulous spiritual fantasy. You may long for the days when life was simpler, when you fit in, when you didn't question everything, when you could just go along with the program like everyone else. But here's what you must understand. This loneliness, this sense of isolation, is not a sign that you've gone wrong. It's a sign that you're going right. It's an inevitable stage in the process of transformation. Every hero in every myth must leave the village, must venture into the unknown, must face dragons and demons alone before they can return with the treasure. The treasure, in this case, is your authentic self, your true nature, freed from the conditioning and programming of society. But you cannot claim this treasure while still clinging to the approval and acceptance of those who represent that very conditioning. You must be willing to stand alone, to be misunderstood, to be criticized, to be rejected. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This doesn't mean you should go out of your way to alienate people, or that you should be arrogant or superior, or that you should reject everyone who doesn't share your level of understanding. That would be spiritual egoism, and it's just another trap, another form of separation. What it means is that you accept the consequences of your growth with grace and compassion. You understand that people are where they are, and they're doing the best they can with the level of consciousness they have. You don't judge them or look down on them. You simply recognize that you're on different paths, at least for now. And you trust that if you're meant to have community, if you're meant to have companions on the journey, they will appear. Because here's the wonderful thing. When you outgrow one level, when you shed one shell, you don't remain alone forever. You find others who have also outgrown that level. You discover a new community, a new tribe, a new set of companions who speak your language, who understand your experience, who are wrestling with the same questions you are. This is why spiritual seekers throughout history have formed communities, monasteries, ashrams, mystery schools, philosophical circles. Not because they're elitist or exclusive, but because they needed to be with others who understood what they were experiencing, who could support them through the difficult transitions, who could remind them that they weren't crazy, that the path was real, that the struggle was worthwhile. But these communities are often hidden, or at least not obvious. They don't advertise, they don't proselytize. You find them when you're ready, when your seeking becomes sincere enough, when your loneliness becomes acute enough, and often you find them in unexpected places, a chance conversation with a stranger, a book that falls into your hands at exactly the right moment, a teacher who appears just when you need them. The key is not to cling desperately to the old relationships out of fear of being alone, but also not to cut ties prematurely out of spiritual pride. There's a middle way, as there always is. You maintain what connections you can maintain authentically. You honor your history, your roots, the people who loved you before you changed. But you don't betray yourself to preserve those connections. You don't make yourself small to make others comfortable. And sometimes, miraculously, the people around you grow too. Sometimes your own transformation becomes a catalyst for their awakening. They see something in you, a peace, a clarity, a freedom, and they want it for themselves. They start asking questions. They start opening up. And then the relationship transforms along with you, deepens, becomes more real, more honest, more alive. But you can't force this. You can't make people grow. All you can do is be yourself, be authentic, be the embodiment of what you've discovered, and trust that those who are ready will recognize it. The rest will fall away, and you must let them go with love and gratitude for what they've given you, for the role they played in your journey, even if that role has now ended. The danger of outgrowing everyone around you is real. You may lose friends, family members, communities that once defined you. You may go through periods of profound loneliness. You may question whether it was worth it. But I can tell you, from my own experience and from observing countless others on this path, that on the other side of this danger is a freedom, an authenticity, a depth of being that makes all the losses worthwhile. Because what you gain is yourself, your true self, not the self that was constructed to fit in, to please others, to meet expectations. And once you've found that, once you've tasted that freedom, you realize that you were never really losing anything real. You were only losing illusions, masks, false identities. The real connections, the real love, the real community, these remain, or they appear anew, deeper and truer than before. So if you find yourself outgrowing those around you, know that you're not alone, even in your aloneness. Know that this is part of the process, part of the path. Know that it's temporary, this loneliness, this sense of being between worlds. And know that the courage it takes to keep growing, to keep being true to what you've seen, even when it costs you everything familiar, this courage is the mark of a genuine spiritual warrior, a true seeker of truth. The caterpillar must die for the butterfly to be born. There's no way around it. But what emerges is so much more beautiful, so much more free, so much more alive than what was lost. Trust the process. Trust your growth, and trust that life, in its infinite intelligence, is guiding you exactly where you need to go, even when the path leads through darkness and uncertainty. Let us be honest for a moment, painfully honest. By all outward appearances, this thing we call life is merely a flicker, a brief spark of light between two endless nights, and not even a peaceful day between them. For the more we allow ourselves to feel pleasure, the more open we are to pain. The more light we draw in, the darker the shadow that follows. And it is always there just behind the laughter, the triumph, the so-called joy. We have tried, through centuries of effort and imagination, to make sense of this, to give meaning to a flickering existence that ends in silence. And the only way we seem able to do this is by insisting there must be something more, some deeper layer, some grander plan behind the outward spectacle. Heaven, salvation, rebirth, destiny, call it what you will. We crave security not merely in this life, but beyond it. Because to accept the rawness of what is that life comes and goes without fixed reason, without guarantee, is a terrifying prospect. Now, I may not be forgiven for introducing such grave matters with a childish image, but the whole affair reminds me of something I tried to do when I was a boy. I wanted to send someone a parcel of water, not a bottle. I wished to tie up the water itself with paper and string. And of course, every time I tried, the result was a soggy mess. The water escaped, just as life slips through our fingers when we try to contain it. You see, human beings are rather brilliant at tying packages. We have built systems of belief, politics, morality, and metaphysics, carefully wrapped bundles of meaning, each attempting to hold the unholdable, name the unnameable. But no matter how clever the method, the package falls apart. The water bursts free. And the more our knowledge has grown, the more history we accumulate, the more facts we collect, the more aware we become, the more fragile these packages appear. They cannot contain the complexity. They cannot hold the flow. And so the modern mind finds itself in a peculiar state, flooded with information, but starving for meaning. We live in an age of extraordinary insecurity, not because the world is more dangerous than before, but because the anchors we use to cling to have unraveled. Traditions, religions, social roles, eternal truths, all questioned, all cast into doubt. Some celebrate this as a liberation. Others, understandably, find it disorienting, even terrifying. And most people live somewhere between the two, briefly exhilarated by freedom, then quietly overtaken by dread. For if nothing is fixed, if life is truly just change, just flow, just this present, then what becomes of hope? Hope, you see, is always aimed at the future. A better job, a longer life, a heaven after death. But if the future is as fluid as water, if there is no promised land awaiting us, what then? It seems, quite frankly, hopeless. And yet, we still chase. We chase happiness not in the present, but in the promise of what is to come. We say, just around the corner, then I'll be fulfilled. After this crisis passes, once I've found my purpose, when I retire, when I die. But the future, like the water in my childhood parcel, never quite arrives. And even when it seems to when the long-awaited day finally comes, we find it cannot be enjoyed unless it, too, carries the promise of another future beyond it. It's a cruel trick of the mind. To seek happiness in the future is to forever chase a mirage, a will-o'-the-wisp that disappears the moment you reach for it. And then in the end you vanish too. But understand this insecurity, this uncertainty, is not new. There has never been a time in human history where security was more than temporary, more than an illusion. Even in what we call the good old days, life was fragile. Death, disease, and disaster did not wait politely at the margins. What made life bearable then, however, was not certainty, but belief. Belief in God, in the soul, in eternal justice, things untouched by the calamities of the world. And while these beliefs may not have made life less precarious, they gave it shape. They gave it meaning. But now today, such convictions are harder to find. Even in churches and temples, even among the devout, there lingers doubt. Science has not only replaced religion in authority, it has stripped from us the comfort of myth. The scientist does not pretend to know what cannot be known, and in doing so reveals the vast, indifferent mystery of the cosmos. This honesty, admirable though it is, leaves the human heart famished. Because while the mind is satisfied with logic, the soul yearns for more. It wants purpose, direction, assurance that all of this matters. And when those assurances collapse, we look elsewhere. Political movements become our myths. Social crusades become our meaning. We join collective efforts, not always because they are just, but because they give us a sense of being part of something larger, a sense that we are not alone in the dark. But you can feel it, can't you? The trembling underneath. For these are not certainties, but shouts in the night. And the louder we shout, the more fragile we reveal ourselves to be. So what happens to a mind, to a being, that can no longer believe? Not in fairy tales, but in any foundation at all. What becomes of the heart when all the old myths crumble and the new ones ring hollow? It begins to grasp. We turn inward, hoping to find permanence in ourselves, in our identities, our careers, our knowledge. We say, at least I am this, or at least I know that. But the truth, if you look just a little too long in the mirror, is that you are changing constantly, quietly, without your permission. The face, the thoughts, the tastes, the hopes, none of them stay. And so you clutch, you plan, you try to prepare, to fortify. You attempt, as all modern people do, to organize your life into a blueprint of safety. You build routines, set goals, make lists, meditate, track your calories, forecast your income, visualize success. You try, in every imaginable way, to manage the future. But no matter how precise the effort, the outcome never feels secure. Something always slips out of view. Some variable, some person, some emotion, some event ruins the equation. And you are back where you started, uncertain. And then here lies the rub. You blame yourself. You say, if only I had tried harder, planned better, prayed deeper, been more focused. But the real problem is not your failure. The problem is the game itself. Because you are chasing control in a world that is uncontrollable. You are searching for security in a realm that is defined by change. It is, as we said before, like trying to tie up water in a paper parcel. You get wet, you fail. You try again. And in that trying, in that reaching for a future that never arrives, you create your own suffering. Here is the paradox. The desire for security is the very thing that makes you feel insecure. The more you want to feel safe, the more you notice how unsafe things really are. The more tightly you grip the rope, the more your hands burn. In the act of resisting uncertainty, you become obsessed with it. And what you resist, you magnify. Fear breeds fear. Worry breeds more worry. To want safety, absolute, permanent safety, is to fight against the very nature of existence. Because the universe, you see, is not fixed. It dances, it flows. It erupts and collapses, sings and silences, all in rhythm without asking your permission. And so, when you demand that it pause for your comfort, you suffer. Because life will not hold still. It will not meet you in the future. It is already here. The mistake is in thinking you can stand apart from it, manage it, direct it from some imagined place of separateness. But you are not outside of life. You are not the observer looking in. You are in it. You are it. just as a wave is not something separate from the ocean. It is the ocean momentarily expressing itself as a wave, so you are not separate from the universe, but the universe momentarily expressing itself as you. And the moment you see this, the need for security begins to dissolve. Because what could be more secure than this very moment, the only one that ever truly exists? So then, what is one to do? If life offers no final foothold, if beliefs fade, if plans crumble, if even the self turns to smoke under scrutiny, where does one stand? And the answer, though simple, is not easy. You stop standing. You stop seeking a ground. And you fall freely, openly, into the present. Not because the present moment is safe, but because it's the only thing that's real. You see, we have confused the idea of freedom with the power to control. We think we are free when we have mastery over the future, when we've eliminated risk, when the path is clear and marked. But that isn't freedom at all. That is fear wearing the mask of progress. Real freedom is far more wild. It's the surrender to the rhythm of life, to change, to death, to rebirth, not as things to overcome, but as the very texture of existence, because in truth, you were never in control. There was never a separate you behind the eyes, managing the world like a ship from its helm. There is only awareness, witnessing, dancing, being. But as long as you try to cling to certainty, to permanence, to me, you will suffer. You suffer not because life is cruel, but because you want it to be something it is not. You want it to be solid, predictable, safe, and life, thank God, is none of those things. The very beauty of it all is in its impermanence. A cherry blossom is not less beautiful because it falls. The sun is no less radiant because it sets. So why do you imagine you must remain? Why do you fight to freeze the flowing water? The wisdom of insecurity is not some clever philosophy. It is a way of seeing, a return. It is the recognition that the moment you stop trying to secure your life is the moment it becomes alive. That in letting go of your need for answers, you begin to feel the mystery again. You were never meant to have it all figured out. The point was never to capture life, but to feel it. To live it as music, not as math. As dance, not direction. So, when you stop resisting change, when you no longer brace against the current, you find that the river was carrying you all along. You are not lost. You are not late. You are simply here. And here is enough. Now, perhaps the greatest illusion of all the root from which all this anxiety springs is the idea that you are separate from life, that you are a skin-encapsulated ego, tossed into a world not of your choosing, doing your best to survive, and hopefully to succeed. But who told you that? Where did you get this idea that there is a little you inside your head, pulling the levers and thinking the thoughts, directing the action like some spiritual CEO? You were taught it. You were told from the very beginning, you are you, and everything else is other. And so you've spent your life defending that boundary. But consider this, can there be a front without a back? Can you have a coin with only one side? You are not a stranger here. You are the universe, expressing itself briefly as a person. Just as a wave is not separate from the sea, you are not separate from the whole. The air you breathe, the thoughts you think, the heartbeat in your chest, these are not possessions, they are processes. Movements, the world happening through you. You don't beat your heart, you don't grow your hair, and you certainly don't choose your thoughts. They arise as clouds form and drift and dissolve. So when you let go of the idea of being someone in charge, what's left is not chaos but peace. The fear of death begins to dissolve because you see, there was never a fixed you to lose in the first place. So then how does one live, knowing that all things pass? You live as the tree lives, bending in the wind, rooted not in certainty, but in presence. You do not cling to the leaves, for you know they must fall. You do not beg the river to stop flowing, for its movement is its music. To love life truly is to love its change. To love without owning, to act without anxiety, to hold without grasping. You eat the fruit of the moment, you taste it fully, but you do not try to preserve the peel or frame the seed. This is not a call to apathy or passivity. No, quite the opposite. When you are no longer driven by fear, you begin to live with gentleness and with great power. You laugh more. You cry more easily. You touch the world more softly because you are no longer trying to conquer it. You are it.